For more than 4,000 years, the Valdran Empire ruled the galaxy with fear. Thousands of planets obeyed its commands, and entire civilizations disappeared after refusing to kneel before its fleets. The Empire believed no force in the universe could challenge its power. Their warships stretched across star systems like endless walls of steel. Their soldiers conquered worlds without mercy, and their rulers treated weaker species like insects beneath their feet. Across the galaxy, people whispered stories about planets burning under Valdran attacks, about cities turned into ash within hours, and about fleets vanishing after facing the Empire's terrifying armadas. Every race feared them. Every race except humanity. Deep inside Terran space, life continued peacefully even as the largest Valdran fleet ever assembled moved toward Earth's borders. On Luna Station above Earth, Commander Jihan stood silently beside the giant observation window while officers rushed around him. Hundreds of holographic screens showed enemy fleets crossing into Terran territory. The numbers were impossible to ignore. Over 20,000 Valdran warships advanced together in perfect formation, enough firepower to erase entire systems. Yet Jihan remained calm. Beside him stood Captain Hygiene, who watched the approaching armada with narrowed eyes. "They really brought everything," she said quietly. Jihan nodded once. "They want the galaxy watching." Far away aboard the massive Valdran flagship Dominus Rex, Supreme Commander Kaler sat upon his black throne-like command chair, staring proudly at the holographic image of Earth. Around him, his officers laughed openly as Terran fleet reports appeared before them. "Only 12 warships?" one alien commander said with amusement. "This is humanity's defense?" Another officer shook his head. "The Terrans are either fools or cowards." Kaler smiled coldly. "No species survives long against the Empire. Humanity simply delayed the inevitable." The massive command chamber echoed with laughter. For months the Empire had prepared for this invasion. Their spies claimed Terran technology was outdated compared to Valdran systems. Human ships appeared smaller, slower, and lightly armed. Their military numbers looked tiny compared to the Empire's endless fleets. Everything suggested humanity would surrender the moment the invasion began. But one thing disturbed Kaler slightly. Humanity showed no fear. No panic signals spread across Terran space. No evacuation fleets fled from Earth. Trade routes remained open. Civilian ships still moved calmly between planets. Music festivals continued on Mars. Markets stayed crowded on Titan. Terran citizens acted as if nothing dangerous was approaching. It made no sense. On Earth, in the crowded streets of Neo-Sol, people gathered inside restaurants and cafes while giant news screens displayed images of the incoming Valdran fleet. A young boy pointed excitedly toward the screen. "Mom, are we really going to war?" His mother smiled gently while drinking her tea. "Maybe for a few minutes." Nearby, an old veteran named Dong Min watched silently from a park bench. He had served during the Outer Colony Wars decades earlier. Unlike the younger civilians around him, his eyes carried old memories and quiet understanding. Beside him, a teenager asked nervously, "Why isn't anyone afraid?" Dong Min gave a slow smile. "Because the Empire made one mistake." "What mistake?" "They think humans fear monsters." Back aboard Luna Station, Admiral Subin entered the command center. Every officer immediately stood straight as she walked toward the main tactical display. She was calm, sharp-eyed, and carried none of the fear the Valdran expected from humanity's leaders. Hygiene handed her a data tablet. Enemy fleet entering final approach range. Subin studied the display carefully. 20,000 enemy warships moved like a dark ocean through space. Giant carriers, heavy destroyers, battle cruisers, and planetary siege platforms filled the stars. Against them stood only 12 Terran ships floating silently near the orbit of Neptune. To any observer, the battle already looked decided. Jihan glanced toward her. "The galaxy is watching." Subin nodded once. "Good. Let them watch carefully." Seconds later, an incoming transmission flashed across every Terran screen. Kaler's towering figure appeared surrounded by armored Valdran officers. His pale silver eyes looked down on the humans with clear arrogance. "People of Earth," he announced loudly, "your species stands before the might of the Valdran Empire. Surrender now, and your extinction may yet be avoided." Silence filled Luna Station. Then Subin calmly stepped forward onto the transmission platform. "No," she answered simply. The alien officers burst into laughter behind Kaler. One of them leaned forward mockingly. 12 ships? He sneered. "You intend to stop us with 12 ships?" Subin's face never changed. "That depends," she replied quietly. "How many fleets did you bring?" Kaler's smile faded slightly. "You still dare mock the Empire?" "No," Subin answered. "We're just surprised you came personally." For the first time, unease spread across several Valdran officers. Kaler narrowed his eyes. "You believe humanity can win?" Jihan finally stepped beside Subin. "Commander," he said calmly, "you studied our weapons, our fleets, and our colonies." He paused. "But you never studied humanity itself." Kaler slammed his hand against his throne. "Enough. Prepare the attack." The transmission ended instantly. Across space, thousands of Valdran weapons began charging at once. Massive cannons glowed red. Missile bays opened across countless warships. The stars themselves seemed to darken beneath the Empire's fleet. On Luna Station, warning alarms quietly echoed through the halls. Yet nobody panicked. Officers moved calmly between stations. Pilots prepared without fear. Some soldiers even laughed softly while checking equipment. Hygiene looked toward the tactical screen. Enemy weapons fully charged. Jihan folded his hands behind his back. Right on schedule. Far beyond Neptune, the 12 Terran ships drifted silently in darkness. Their designs looked simple compared to Valdran vessels. Smooth black hulls reflected faint starlight while no visible weapons appeared on their surfaces. To the Empire, they looked weak, obsolete, fragile. Kaler watched them with disgust from his flagship. "Erase them," he ordered. Thousands of weapons fired together. Blinding streams of plasma and antimatter crossed the darkness like burning rivers. The attack was powerful enough to destroy moons. Across the galaxy, billions watched live transmissions, expecting the Terran fleet to vanish instantly. But seconds before impact, every Terran ship disappeared. Entirely. The massive storm of enemy fire crossed empty space and exploded harmlessly beyond Neptune. Silence spread across Valdran command channels. Officers stared at their scanners in confusion. "Where did they go?" one shouted. "Impossible," another cried. "No hyperspace signatures detected." Kaler rose from his throne slowly. "Find them." But Terran ships were already moving. Without warning, one Valdran destroyer near the center of the fleet suddenly split apart as if crushed by invisible force. Then another exploded beside it. Seconds later, entire formations began vanishing in silent flashes of blue light. Panic erupted across the Valdran armada. "We're under attack. Enemy vessels behind us." "No, now they're gone again." Terran ships appeared and disappeared like ghosts, striking from impossible positions before fading back into darkness. Massive Valdran cruisers exploded one after another while confused commanders fired wildly at empty space. Jihan watched calmly from Luna Station as the enemy fleet descended into chaos. Hygiene stared at the battle feed with a small smile. "They still don't understand." Subin crossed her arms quietly. "They thought humanity survived because we were lucky." Far away, Kaler gripped his throne so tightly the metal cracked beneath his claws. For the first time in decades, fear touched his mind. His greatest fleet was falling apart within minutes, and he still had not seen a single Terran weapon clearly. Then another alert appeared before him. A massive energy source had awakened near Jupiter. One officer turned pale as readings continued rising higher and higher. "Commander," he whispered nervously. "Something is activating inside Terran space." Kaler looked toward the growing signal, and for the first time since the Empire began its conquest of the galaxy, he felt something he had never experienced before. Humanity was not afraid of the Empire. Humanity had been waiting for them. Chaos spread across the Valdren fleet as more warships exploded in the darkness near Neptune. Commanders shouted over each other, while alarm sirens screamed through the massive alien vessels. Every scanner failed to lock onto the Terran ships for more than a second before they vanished again like shadows slipping through space itself. One moment a Terran cruiser appeared beside a Valdren destroyer, and the next moment the destroyer broke apart in silence while the Terran ship disappeared without leaving a trace. On the bridge of the Dominus Rex, Supreme Commander Kaler stared furiously at the battle unfolding around him. His officers no longer laughed. Fear now filled their faces as entire formations collapsed within minutes. "Track those ships," Kaler roared. "I want firing solutions now." A trembling officer shook his head. "Commander, we cannot predict their movement. They appear outside normal space for less than 2 seconds before vanishing again." Another officer turned from his station with panic in his eyes. 37 destroyers lost. 12 battle cruisers destroyed. Their attacks are targeting command ships first. Kaler slammed both fists against the armrest of his throne. Impossible. No species has this level of phase technology. But deep inside he already knew the truth. Humanity had hidden its real strength from the galaxy for centuries. Far away aboard the Terran flagship Dawn Horizon, Admiral Subin watched the battle calmly while holographic displays surrounded her. Blue tactical symbols moved across the command room as Terran ships shifted in and out of phase veil space. Crew members worked quietly without panic or excitement. To them, this battle had already ended before it truly began. Jihan stood beside the central display studying the enemy fleet. "The Valdren are regrouping around their carriers," he said. Hygiene nodded while adjusting attack patterns on her console. "They're trying to form layered defense walls." Subin looked toward the stars outside the bridge window. "Predictable." She touched the console lightly. "Release second-wave drones." Instantly, hidden compartments opened beneath the Terran ships. Thousands of small black drones poured into space like swarms of insects before vanishing into darkness. Seconds later, explosions erupted deep inside the Valdren formation. Entire communication towers shattered. Navigation systems failed across multiple vessels. Massive carriers drifted helplessly as Terran attacks crippled them from within. On the Dominus Rex, lights flickered violently as another explosion shook the ship. Officers nearly fell from their stations. "Internal systems are failing," one shouted. Enemy drones breached the defense grid. Kaler turned toward the tactical display in disbelief. "How are they inside our formation already?" No one answered. Meanwhile, across Terran space, civilians continued watching the battle through public broadcasts. Inside a crowded cafe in Neo-Busan, people sat quietly as news screens showed the once proud Valdren fleet slowly falling apart. A young woman named Mi-young leaned closer to the screen. "I thought the Empire was unbeatable." Beside her, an old engineer named Day-6 smiled faintly. "That's because the galaxy only saw what humanity wanted them to see." "You knew this would happen?" she asked. Day-6 nodded slowly. "Humanity learned long ago that showing weakness can be more useful than showing power." On Mars, children gathered outside schools watching bright flashes appear across the night sky through giant observatory screens. Teachers calmly explained battle movements while students stared in amazement at Terran ships blinking through enemy formations like ghosts. No fear existed anywhere in Terran space. Humanity had prepared for this day for generations. Back aboard the Dawn Horizon, Hygiene monitored enemy transmissions. Valdren fleets from nearby sectors are attempting emergency jumps toward the battle. Jihan crossed his arms. Too late. Suddenly a new signal appeared across the Terran network. Deep within the outer solar system, the massive hidden structure near Jupiter continued awakening. Energy readings climbed higher every second. Even Terran officers became quieter whenever the object appeared on their screens. The structure was enormous, nearly the size of a moon, covered in dark metallic layers and surrounded by rings of glowing blue energy. For centuries, its existence remained hidden beneath Jupiter's magnetic storms. Most humans never even knew it existed. Subin studied the signal carefully. "How long until activation?" 27 minutes, Hygiene answered softly. Jihan looked toward the growing energy signature. The Valdrins still think this is only a fleet battle. Subin's eyes hardened slightly. Then they have learned nothing. On the Dominus Rex, Kaler finally received reports from surviving scouts near Jupiter. A holographic image of the giant Terran structure appeared before him. Several officers stared at it in silence. "What is it?" Kaler demanded. One scientist hesitated nervously. We do not know, but the energy output exceeds anything in our records." Another officer swallowed hard. "Commander, if those readings continue increasing, the object may possess planet-level destructive power." Kaler's expression darkened. "Humanity hid this from the galaxy? It appears so." Before Kaler could answer, another explosion rocked the flagship. A nearby carrier vanished completely as a Terran battleship appeared directly beside it for half a second before disappearing again. The surviving Valdran ships fired wildly into empty space, hitting nothing except their own allies. Panic spread faster with every minute. Across the fleet, frightened soldiers whispered the same words again and again. Ghost ships. Deep beneath Luna Station, inside one of Earth's oldest command bunkers, Dr. Eun-kyung stood before a massive wall of glowing systems. Scientists moved around her carefully while ancient machines hummed beneath the floor. Unlike the military officers above, she wore simple gray clothing and carried no weapon. Yet even Terran admirals treated her with deep respect. One technician looked nervously toward the massive energy readings rising near Jupiter. "Doctor, the Aegis core is stabilizing faster than expected." Eun-kyung nodded calmly. "Good." Another scientist hesitated before speaking. "Do you think the galaxy is ready to see it?" For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Eun-kyung answered quietly. "No one is ever ready." Back in battle, the Valdran fleet attempted retreat for the first time in centuries. Several damaged carriers turned away from Neptune while emergency hyperspace drives activated. But before the ships could escape, Terran drones suddenly formed massive glowing fields across the surrounding space lanes. The first carrier attempting escape slammed directly into an invisible barrier and tore itself apart instantly. Shock spread across every surviving Valdran bridge. "Hyperspace lanes blocked!" An officer screamed aboard the Dominus Rex. The Terrans sealed the corridors. Kaler stared at the display in growing horror. "That is impossible. No fleet can control hyperspace itself." Yet humanity clearly could. Jihan watched the trapped enemy fleet without emotion. "Now they understand." Hygiene looked toward him quietly. "Do they?" Before he could answer, emergency signals flooded Terran scanners. New enemy fleets were arriving from nearby sectors, hundreds of additional warships jumping into the system to support Kaler's collapsing armada. The arriving commanders immediately opened fire toward the Terran positions. But the moment their weapons activated, something strange happened. Every system aboard the incoming ships suddenly shut down at once. Engines died. Weapons failed. Entire vessels drifted helplessly through space. Confused alien crews screamed as Terran cyber warfare systems invaded their networks instantly. Subin finally allowed herself a faint smile. "They still use centralized combat AI." Jihan nodded. "A mistake humanity stopped making centuries ago." On Earth, billions continued watching calmly as the mighty Empire slowly lost control of the battle. Across the galaxy, countless alien civilizations watched in shock and disbelief. For thousands of years, the Valdran Empire represented unstoppable power. Now that power crumbled before only 12 Terran ships. But the true fear had not yet begun. Near Jupiter, the hidden Terran structure fully awakened at last. Massive rings rotated around its surface while blue energy spread across space like giant waves. Every sensor in the system detected the impossible power rising from the machine. Even Terran officers fell silent as the ancient weapon came online for the first time in over 200 years. On the bridge of the Dominus Rex, Kaler stared at the glowing object with pale fear in his eyes. Then a final report appeared before him. The structure had a name. One simple Terran word. Aegis. And moments later, the stars themselves began to bend around it. The stars twisted around the massive Aegis structure near Jupiter as waves of blue energy rolled across the solar system. Every ship, station, and satellite detected the strange movement in space itself. It looked as if gravity had become alive. On the bridge of the Dominus Rex, silence spread among the Valdran officers as they watched the impossible readings climbing higher every second. Some scanners overloaded completely while others showed numbers beyond their system's limits. Supreme Commander Kaler stood frozen before the giant tactical display. For the first time in his long military career, he did not know what command to give. "Report," he demanded quietly. One officer swallowed hard before answering. "The Terran structure is generating controlled gravity distortions across multiple sectors." Another officer looked pale as he read new reports. "Commander, space itself is bending around the object." Kaler clenched his jaw tightly. No civilization should possess this technology. Deep inside the Terran command bunker beneath Luna Station, Dr. Eun-kyung calmly watched the Aegis system stabilize. Massive holographic rings rotated above the control chamber while ancient machines awakened one by one beneath the underground complex. Scientists moved carefully between consoles, speaking in low voices as if afraid to disturb the machine itself. A young technician named Yoon he looked toward the glowing displays nervously. "Doctor, the gravitational lattice is reaching combat levels." Eun-kyung nodded once. "Maintain stabilization." Another scientist hesitated before speaking. "If we fully activate Aegis, the entire galaxy will know humanity hid this weapon for centuries." Eun-kyung's expression remained calm, but sadness briefly touched her eyes. Humanity never wanted the galaxy to see this. Far above them, the battle near Neptune continued growing worse for the Empire. Terran ships moved through the enemy fleet like shadows, striking command vessels and weapon platforms before disappearing again into phase-veil space. The once proud Valdran armada now looked broken and scattered. Burning wreckage drifted between crippled cruisers while damaged carriers spun helplessly through darkness. Entire formations lost communication as Terran cyber warfare systems spread deeper into the enemy network. On the dawn horizon, Admiral Subin stood beside Jihan watching live battle feeds. "Enemy morale is collapsing," Hygiene reported. "Several ships are surrendering." Jihan studied the tactical display quietly. Kaler still believes numbers can save him. Subin crossed her arms. That belief built the Empire. Suddenly, new alarms echoed across the bridge. Long-range scanners detected massive hyperspace ruptures forming outside the solar system. More Valdran reinforcements were arriving. Hundreds of additional warships emerged from hyperspace in organized formations, their weapons already charging for battle. The Empire was throwing everything it had toward Earth. Hygiene stared at the growing enemy fleet. "They just doubled their numbers." Jihan remained calm. "It changes nothing." But aboard the Dominus Rex, Kaler finally saw hope. "Reinforcement fleets have arrived," one officer announced quickly. 6 more battle groups entering combat range. Kaler slowly regained his confidence. "Good. Surround the Terran ships. Destroy the phase-veil vessels first." Orders spread rapidly across the remaining Valdran fleet. Thousands of weapons turned toward the Terran positions as fresh warships joined the battle. Bright streams of plasma fire filled the darkness near Neptune, while missile storms crossed space like rivers of light. For a brief moment, the Empire appeared to regain control. Then Aegis activated. Without warning, the stars themselves bent. Across the battlefield, invisible gravitational waves swept through the Valdran formation. Entire cruisers suddenly twisted apart as powerful forces crushed their armored hulls inward. Massive carriers folded like paper. Some ships exploded instantly while others stretched and shattered under impossible pressure. Panic erupted across every Valdran communication channel. Gravity spike detected. Engines failing. Hull collapse on decks 7 through 20. One battleship near the center of the fleet suddenly crumpled into a burning sphere before vanishing completely into a black singularity. Nearby ships were dragged toward it helplessly, colliding and exploding together in chains of destruction. On the Dominus Rex, Officers screamed as alarms filled the bridge. "Commander, the Terrans are weaponizing gravity itself." Kaler stared in horror at the collapsing fleet around him. "No," he whispered. "This cannot exist." Deep beneath Luna Station, Eun-kyung watched the battlefield through silent holographic projections. Her face showed no pride, only quiet regret. "Yoon," he looked toward her nervously. "The lattice is stable. We can increase output." Eun-kyung closed her eyes briefly. Memories returned to her of old Earth history, of ancient wars where humanity nearly destroyed itself with weapons too terrible to control. Humanity had built Aegis after those dark years, not as a tool for conquest, but as a final shield against extinction. For centuries it remained hidden because Terran leaders feared what would happen if anyone used it openly. Yet now the Empire had forced humanity's hand. "Maintain current output only," Eun-kyung said softly. "No higher." Back on Earth, civilians watched the battle with growing silence. Even though Terrans trusted their military, seeing entire enemy fleets destroyed by the bending of space itself unsettled many people. In Neo-Sol, Mi-young stood outside beneath giant public screens while burning Valdran ships drifted across the display. "How long has humanity had this weapon?" she asked quietly. Beside her, Daesik kept his eyes on the screen. "Long enough to fear it." Nearby, children stopped cheering as they watched another giant enemy carrier collapse into itself like crushed metal. The war no longer looked exciting. It looked terrifying. Across the galaxy, alien civilizations reacted with shock and fear. Hidden observers watching from distant systems recorded every moment of the battle. Empires that once mocked humanity now stared silently at the impossible power of Aegis. Some worlds immediately began evacuating military bases, fearing Terran retaliation. Others sent emergency diplomatic messages toward Earth, begging for peace before humanity turned its weapons outward. But inside the Terran fleet, no celebration existed. Jihan quietly watched the destruction unfolding around Neptune. "Too many deaths already," he said softly. Hygiene glanced toward him. "The Empire would have burned Earth without hesitation." Jihan nodded slowly. "I know." On the Dominus Rex, Kaler finally understood the truth. Humanity had never feared the Empire because humanity had already survived something far worse. It had survived itself. Terran weapons were not built by proud conquerors seeking power. They were built by survivors who never wanted another extinction war again. That realization chilled him more deeply than the battle itself. Suddenly another officer turned toward Kaler with panic. "Commander, the hyperspace corridors are fully sealed. We cannot retreat." Kaler's eyes widened. Terran drones and hidden stations had surrounded the system completely, blocking every possible escape route. Thousands of surviving Valdran ships were trapped. At the same moment, Aegis expanded its gravitational field across the battlefield. Engines failed across entire enemy formations. Weapons shut down as systems overloaded under intense spatial distortion. Terran ships moved silently between the crippled Valdran vessels like hunters among frozen prey. Yet instead of destroying every enemy ship, Terran forces targeted weapons, engines, and command systems only. They could have erased the Empire entirely within minutes, but they chose restraint. That frightened Kaler even more. A species with such power should have become conquerors long ago. Instead, humanity hid in silence for centuries. Why? Then the answer slowly formed inside his mind. Humanity understood power better than any civilization in the galaxy because humanity feared becoming monsters again. On Luna Station, Subin received the latest surrender reports. More than 300 Valdran ships had powered down their weapons voluntarily. Others drifted helplessly after losing all combat systems. Hygiene looked toward the growing surrender list. "They're breaking." Jihan nodded. The Empire built its rule on fear. Once fear disappears, everything collapses. Far beyond Neptune, the surviving Valdran reinforcements finally stopped advancing. Entire fleets floated motionless as their commanders stared at the distorted stars around Jupiter. No one wanted to move closer to Aegis. The giant structure glowed brighter in the darkness, while rings of blue energy continued turning slowly around its massive body. It no longer looked like a machine. It looked like the heart of some sleeping god. Then, across every surviving Valdran ship, a Terran transmission suddenly appeared. Admiral Subin stood calmly on screen, her voice steady and clear. "This is your final warning," she said. "Power down your weapons and surrender peacefully." She paused briefly while burning wreckage drifted behind her on the battlefield display. "Humanity does not seek conquest." Her eyes hardened slightly. "But we will end this war tonight." Part 4. The battlefield near Neptune had become silent compared to the chaos from earlier hours. Burning wreckage floated through space while damaged Valdran warships drifted helplessly between shattered formations. The once proud Empire fleet now looked broken and lost beneath the cold light of distant stars. Thousands of enemy vessels remained trapped inside Terran-controlled space with their engines crippled, weapons disabled, and communication systems barely functioning under the pressure of the Aegis gravitational field. The giant Terran structure near Jupiter continued glowing with blue energy, bending the stars around it in ways no civilization had ever seen before. Across the galaxy, billions watched the battle through emergency broadcasts. Entire worlds stood silent as the unstoppable Valdran Empire collapsed before humanity in only a few hours. On the bridge of the Dominus Rex, Supreme Commander Kaler stared at the tactical display with hollow eyes. Red warning symbols covered every section of the screen. More surrender signals appeared every minute as frightened Valdran captains powered down their ships rather than face destruction. Officers moved nervously around the bridge, afraid to even speak above whispers. The Empire had never suffered defeat like this in its entire history. Kaler slowly lowered himself onto his command throne, his face pale beneath the flashing red emergency lights. "Status?" he asked quietly. One officer swallowed hard before answering. 70% of the fleet is disabled or destroyed. Communications with outer battle groups are failing. Another officer looked down at his console with trembling hands. 3 more carriers surrendered moments ago. Kaler closed his eyes briefly. For thousands of years, the Empire ruled through fear. Entire civilizations obeyed because they believed resistance was hopeless. But now the fear belonged to the Empire itself. Far away aboard the dawn horizon, Admiral Subin watched the enemy fleet carefully while holographic displays floated around the bridge. Jihan stood beside her studying fresh surrender reports from across the battlefield. Hygiene monitored the Aegis systems while Terran officers quietly coordinated fleet positions. Unlike the chaos spreading through Valdran ships, the Terran command deck remained calm and controlled. "The remaining Valdran fleets are regrouping near Saturn's orbit," Hygiene reported. "No offensive movement detected." Jihan nodded slightly. "They finally understand." Subin kept her eyes on the battlefield. "No," she said softly. "Kaler still believes pride can save him." As if proving her words, new energy signals suddenly appeared across several surviving Valdran warships. Emergency power surged into their remaining weapons. A handful of battle cruisers turned toward Earth one final time. On the Dominus Rex, Kaler slowly rose from his throne again. His officers looked at him with fear and confusion. "Commander?" one asked carefully. Kaler's expression hardened. "The Empire does not surrender." "But sir," another officer whispered, "we cannot win." Kaler turned toward the massive view screen showing Earth far in the distance. "If the Empire falls today," he said coldly, "then humanity falls with us." Orders spread across the remaining loyal ships. Damaged weapon systems forced themselves online while overloaded reactors screamed under rising power levels. The surviving Valdran commanders prepared one final attack directly toward Earth itself. On Luna Station, warning alarms immediately echoed through the command center. Officers turned toward Subin as enemy weapons reactivated. Hygiene's eyes narrowed at the incoming signals. "They're preparing a suicide assault." Jihan folded his arms quietly. Kaler chose pride over survival. For a brief moment, silence filled the Terran bridge. Then Subin gave a single order. "End it." Deep beneath Luna Station, Dr. Eunkyung looked toward the glowing Aegis core as new authorization codes appeared across her console. The final stage of the system waited for activation. Yoon-hee stared nervously at the rising energy levels. Doctor, if we release the full pulse, every enemy system inside the solar system will collapse instantly. Eun-kyung nodded slowly. I know. Should we proceed? For several seconds, Eun-kyung remained silent. She remembered old Earth records from centuries earlier, when humanity nearly destroyed itself through endless wars and unchecked weapons. Back then, nations fought for pride exactly like the Valdran Empire fought now. Humanity survived only after learning the terrible cost of arrogance. That lesson shaped every Terran defense system afterward. Aegis was never created to conquer. It existed to end wars before entire civilizations vanished. Finally, Eun-kyung placed her hand on the activation panel. Proceed. Near Jupiter, the giant Aegis structure suddenly changed. Massive rings rotated faster around its enormous body, while blue energy spread outward like waves across the solar system. Every ship detected the surge instantly. On the Dominus Rex, terrified officers looked toward the growing energy field. Commander, one shouted. The Terran weapon is charging again. Kaler refused to step back. Fire all remaining weapons. Hundreds of damaged Valdran cannons unleashed one final storm of plasma toward Earth. Missiles crossed space while battle cruisers pushed failing engines beyond safety limits. For a brief moment, the battlefield lit up with desperate fire. Then Aegis released its pulse. A silent blue wave swept across the solar system faster than light itself. Every surviving Valdran ship froze instantly. Weapons shut down mid-fire. Engines died without warning. Navigation systems collapsed completely. Across thousands of enemy vessels, lights flickered and vanished together. Entire command networks failed in less than a second. On the Dominus Rex, every screen suddenly went dark. Officers stared around the silent bridge in horror, while emergency lights barely flickered overhead. What happened? Someone whispered. An engineer checked his dead console with shaking hands. Everything is offline. Another officer turned pale. Weapons, engines, shields, all gone. Kaler looked toward the view screen, now showing only darkness and distant stars. For the first time in his life, he felt completely powerless. Outside the ship, the entire Valdran fleet drifted silently through space. Thousands of warships floated helplessly while Terran vessels moved calmly between them. Humanity had ended the war without destroying every enemy ship. They had simply taken away the Empire's ability to fight. On Earth, civilians watched the impossible moment unfold across giant public screens. In Neo-Busan, Myung stood beside thousands of silent people as the last Valdran weapons went dark. It's over, she whispered. Daesik nodded slowly beside her. Humanity ended the war the moment it began. Across the galaxy, fear spread faster than ever before. Alien governments watched Terran fleets disable the mightiest empire in existence within minutes. Some worlds immediately ordered peace negotiations with Earth. Others began shutting down military programs entirely, terrified humanity might one day turn Aegis toward them. But aboard the Dawn Horizon, no celebration filled the bridge. Subin quietly watched the drifting enemy ships with tired eyes. Jihan noticed her expression. You think this victory changes everything? She nodded slightly. The galaxy saw what humanity can do. Hygiene looked toward the glowing Aegis structure near Jupiter. Maybe they needed to. Jihan remained silent for a moment before answering. Power always frightens people. Suddenly, a new transmission request appeared on the Terran command network. It came directly from the powerless Dominus Rex. Subin accepted the signal. Kaler's image appeared on screen once more, but the arrogance from before had vanished completely. The mighty commander now looked exhausted and broken. Smoke drifted behind him across the darkened bridge while silent officers stood in the background. Kaler stared at Subin for several seconds before finally speaking. Why? He asked quietly. You could have destroyed us all. Subin answered calmly. Because humanity remembers what happens when victory becomes cruelty. Kaler lowered his head slowly. For the first time, he truly understood humanity's strength. It was not their weapons. It was the fact they possessed such terrible power yet still chose mercy. Around the galaxy, the Empire's colonies already began breaking away as news of the defeat spread. Entire sectors declared independence within hours. Military governors abandoned their posts. Fear no longer protected the Empire because humanity had shattered the illusion of invincibility forever. On Luna Station, new reports flooded Terran command. Valdran forces across nearby systems are surrendering, Hygiene announced. Jihan exhaled quietly. Then it's finished. But Subin kept watching the stars beyond the bridge window. The war had ended, yet she understood the truth better than anyone. Humanity had just revealed its darkest secret to the galaxy. Nothing would ever be the same again. The war ended in silence. Across the solar system, thousands of powerless Valdran warships floated motionless between the stars while Terran fleets moved carefully among them, securing weapons and rescuing damaged crews from destroyed vessels. Fire still burned across broken carriers, and pieces of shattered battleships drifted slowly through the darkness near Neptune. But the fighting itself was over. For the first time in 4,000 years, the mighty Valdran Empire had been defeated. News spread across the galaxy faster than light. Entire worlds watched the impossible broadcasts again and again, unable to believe what they had seen. The empire that once ruled through fear had collapsed within a single day after challenging humanity. On Earth, however, there were no victory parades and no celebrations in the streets. People gathered quietly in homes, cafes, and public squares while giant screens replayed the battle near Jupiter. Many Terrans looked proud, but others looked uneasy after witnessing the true power of Aegis. In Neo-Sol, Mi-young stood beside Dae-sik outside a crowded transit station, while children nearby stared at holographic images of the giant Terran structure. "We saved ourselves," Mi-young said softly. Dae-sik nodded once. "Yes." He kept watching the screen for a moment before speaking again. "But now the galaxy knows what humanity can do." Across Terran space, military ships escorted surrendered Valdran vessels away from major population centers, while engineers worked to stabilize damaged systems aboard drifting enemy carriers. Terran medics treated wounded Valdran soldiers without hesitation, even after the invasion fleet had nearly attacked Earth itself. Many captured officers expected punishment or execution, but humanity offered medical care, food, and safe transport instead. The surviving Valdran crews could not understand it. They had spent centuries conquering weaker civilizations without mercy. Humanity had every reason to destroy them completely. Yet Terrans treated even defeated enemies with restraint. Aboard the powerless Dominus Rex, Supreme Commander Kaler stood alone near the bridge viewport watching Terran rescue ships move through the battlefield. The once proud commander looked older now, his face heavy with exhaustion and defeat. Behind him, silent officers waited for orders that would never come. The Empire was already breaking apart beyond the solar system. Colony governors stopped answering central commands. Military sectors declared independence one after another. Entire worlds refused to send support after learning the Terrans had defeated the main invasion fleet so easily. Kaler slowly lowered his head. For most of his life, he believed fear created order. He believed strength alone gave civilizations the right to rule. Humanity had shattered those beliefs within hours. A soft sound behind him made him turn slightly. Admiral Subin entered the darkened bridge with 2 Terran officers beside her. The surviving Valdran guards stepped aside silently. Kaler stared at her for several seconds before finally speaking. "You came personally." Subin nodded calmly. "The war is over." Kaler gave a bitter laugh. "For the Empire, yes." He looked back toward the drifting battlefield outside. "The galaxy will fear humanity now." Subin remained quiet for a moment before answering. "Perhaps." "And what will you do with that fear?" Kaler asked. "Rule." Subin's expression never changed. Humanity spent centuries learning what happens when power controls people through fear. She glanced toward the stars outside the shattered flagship. "We will not repeat that mistake." Kaler looked at her with disbelief. "You defeated the greatest empire in existence. Every civilization will bow before you now. Subin shook her head slowly. That is exactly why we must be careful. Far beneath Luna Station, Dr. Eunkyung stood inside the quiet Aegis control chamber, while scientists slowly powered down the massive system. The glowing holographic rings above the room faded one by one as the ancient machine entered sleep mode again. Yoonhee watched the energy readings fall with visible relief. Aegis returning to standby levels, she reported softly. Eunkyung nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on the fading displays. Seal all primary access routes after shutdown. Yes, doctor. Another scientist hesitated before speaking. Do you think we should dismantle it now? The room fell silent. Eunkyung understood the question well. Humanity had hidden Aegis for generations because Terran leaders feared what might happen if such power ever spread beyond their control. Now the secret was exposed to the entire galaxy. Every government, every military, and every surviving empire would spend years trying to understand the weapon humanity used. Some would fear Earth. Others would try to steal its technology. Slowly, Eunkyung looked toward the darkening holographic core. No, she answered quietly. As long as fear and war exist in the galaxy, humanity may need it again. Meanwhile, across former Valdran territory, massive rebellions began almost immediately. Worlds conquered centuries earlier finally rose against weakened imperial forces. Prison camps were opened. Slave colonies declared freedom. Military commanders abandoned their posts as communication with the Empire collapsed entirely. Terran fleets did not invade these systems or claim new territory. Instead, they transmitted one simple message across every known sector. Humanity did not seek conquest. Many civilizations refused to believe it at first. Some expected Terran armadas to appear over their worlds at any moment. But days passed, and Terran fleets withdrew slowly back toward Earth after securing surrender agreements and rescue operations. On the dawn horizon, Jihan stood beside Hygiene watching stars drift quietly beyond the bridge windows. The battle was over, but neither officer looked relieved. The galaxy sees us differently now, Hygiene said softly. Jihan nodded. There's no hiding anymore. Do you think peace will last? She asked. He thought for a long moment before answering. Peace never lasts forever. Hygiene glanced toward him. Then what was the point? Jihan looked toward the distant glow of Jupiter where Aegis still rested in darkness. Humanity learned long ago that true strength is not winning wars. He folded his arms quietly. It's stopping them before they begin. Days later, representatives from hundreds of alien civilizations gathered for an emergency galactic assembly on a neutral station near the center of explored space. Fear filled the massive chamber as diplomats whispered among themselves about humanity and the terrifying power revealed near Earth. Some demanded sanctions against Terran space. Others argued humanity had only defended itself from invasion. Many smaller worlds openly supported Earth after witnessing the Empire's cruelty. Then the chamber fell silent as Admiral Subin entered alongside a small Terran delegation. Every eye followed her as she walked calmly toward the center platform. No guards surrounded her. No fleet threatened the station outside. Yet the entire assembly watched her with nervous caution. Subin looked across the chamber slowly before speaking. Humanity did not choose this war. Her voice echoed through the silent hall. For centuries we hid our strongest weapons because we understood the danger they represented. Several alien leaders exchanged uneasy glances. Subin continued calmly. The Valdran Empire believed fear gave them power. They believed strength alone gave them the right to rule weaker civilizations. She paused briefly. Humanity once believed the same thing. That statement surprised the chamber. Many species viewed Terrans as disciplined defenders, not survivors of ancient self-destruction. Subin's expression hardened slightly. Long before we reached the stars, humanity nearly destroyed itself through endless wars, greed, and pride. We built weapons that could burn worlds and poison entire generations. Silence spread deeper across the assembly. Aegis exists because humanity promised never to allow extinction to threaten us again. But we also learned something important. She looked directly at the gathered leaders. Power without restraint becomes evil. No one interrupted her. Humanity does not want an empire, Subin said firmly. We will not conquer worlds. We will not rule through fear. Then her voice grew colder. But if another empire threatens innocent lives again, humanity will stand against it. Across the chamber, nervous whispers spread among the alien diplomats. For the first time, many civilizations realized humanity's greatest strength was not Aegis or phase veil technology. It was restraint. Terrans possessed enough power to dominate the galaxy, yet they chose not to use it unless absolutely necessary. Weeks later, as Terran fleets continued rebuilding damaged systems and helping former Valdran worlds recover, children across dozens of liberated planets watched human ships arrive carrying food, medical supplies, and engineers instead of soldiers. On one ruined colony world, a small alien child asked a Terran pilot named Sumin why humans helped former enemies after the war. Sumin smiled gently while watching workers rebuild a shattered city beneath the stars. Because ending a war means more than winning it, she answered softly. Far away near Jupiter, the giant Aegis structure drifted silently in darkness once more, hidden beneath storms and secrecy. The galaxy would never forget what happened there. Humanity had ended the greatest war in modern history within minutes. But in the end, what truly changed the galaxy forever was not humanity's terrifying power. It was the simple fact that they chose mercy when they had every reason not to.